What are your thoughts on the innovations in education today? Thank you.
I think there are definitely some good schools out there. Teachers do not explain why kids are being taught a subject. You just sort of get dumped into math and like, well, why are you learning math? What's the point of this? It seems some people like maybe it's like, I don't know why I'm being asked to do these strange problems. Our brain has evolved to not discard information that it thinks has no relevance. So then, if on the one hand you're being asked to memorize or learn, say, formulas, but you do not know why, then you have this cognitive dissonance of, it seems irrelevant, but I'm being told to remember it, so I'll be punished. Picking kind of a problem and then using various educational tools to solve that problem, like using math or physics or economics to solve that problem, is far more engaging than teaching the tools.
Need motivation?
Watch the Top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because I need it. I need it for me because I don't wake up every day and say, yes, let's go conquer the world. No, I wake up and I need that external motivation to match my internal motivation. When I see somebody who's doing amazing things, it makes me just want to play a bigger game. And so I hope that today's video makes you want to play a bigger game too, because your message matters, and let's get it out to the world. So today, listen from one of the best, Elon Musk, and my take on his top 50 rules for success. Enjoy.
It's the difference between if you say, well, we're going to take apart this engine and see how it works and put it back together again. And then in order to take the engine apart, we need wrenches and screwdrivers and a winch and Allen keys and whatnot. And then in the course of solving the problem of taking the engine apart and putting it back together, you learn about wrenches and screwdrivers and all the tools that you need. And then now you understand the relevance. This is why wrenches are important. Whereas if you had a class on wrenches, you'd be like, why does this not seem that great? So tying it to solving a problem is, I think, very powerful for establishing relevance and getting kids excited about what they're working on. And having the knowledge stick. If you're going to try something innovative, then you're in unexplored territories, so the odds that something will go wrong are pretty high. It's only if you try to do something that is already well understood that there's little chance of failure, but then it will not be interesting or innovative. For sure, uncharted territory will result in failures necessarily. Otherwise, you're not trying hard enough.
SpaceX, you have said you've started with the specific intention of getting to Mars.
The origin of SpaceX was actually not, my interest in space, my initial thought in space was that it wasn't possible to create a company, and I mistakenly thought that the reason that we'd not sent people to Mars was because we'd lost the will to explore or something, or like maybe that, and I thought, well, maybe that needs to be reignited, and so I came up with this idea to do basically a philanthropic mission to Mars with a 100% probability of losing all the money, in order to reignite interest in that goal. But after a while, I realized that that was a mistake. I mean, particularly the United States is a nation of explorers. Came here from other parts of the world. I think more than any other country is a distillation of the human spirit of exploration. There's no lack of will. But people need to believe that there's a way, that a way that's feasible and that it's not going to bankrupt the country, and their living standard won't be materially affected. And then I think they're super keen on that goal. I think like sci-fi movies, video games, or video, and really I think people spend a lot more time on video games and movies these days. Can be pretty inspiring and thought-provoking about what's the future that we want. What are some like impossible-sounding technologies that maybe could work somehow? Like there's conceivably a way to do warp drive, but it's such esoteric, super out on the edge physics, because technically you cannot go faster than the speed of light, but space can travel faster than the speed of light.
That's what's meant by warp drive. But the amount of energy you need to warp space is unbelievably gigantic. So, you'd have to be converting matter to energy at a rate that is cannot conceive, really. It can't be like something like, well, if we just convert 1 Jupiter per second to energy, then problem solved. That's a lot, and there's not many Jupiters. So, and there might be a bit of radiation around that. So, there are things like technically the universe did expand faster than the speed of light. That's why we can see light from all these super distant stars. So it's kind of pretty wild that space expanded faster than the speed of light. So I'm sure we'll figure out some strange breakthroughs and come to grips better with this dark matter, especially, which seems like something's fishy going on there. And
it has bad branding.
Yeah, exactly. The universe is mostly dark energy and dark matter according to current physics, but this kind of you plug them in the equations and they sort of work, and this is not a good explanation. Nobody can find the dark matter. But I sort of figure, hey, if this was a video game and somebody had a bug in their orbital dynamics physics simulator, then it's oh no, we got to figure out some way for these minions in here to believe that they're in reality. So insert dark matter.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there.
What problems out there can feasibly be fixed, say, in our lifetimes?
Well, I think first of all, the world's actually pretty great right now. Arguably better than any point in history. And this is sometimes lost if you read the newspapers. They're like a magnification of all the world's problems. It's newspapers seem to be attempting to answer the question, what was the worst thing that happened on Earth today? And it's...
You're right. If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, and it's okay. And I think there is kind of an evolutionary reason for that, because it makes more sense to, you want to prioritize danger over reward, or because if you get eaten by the lion, it's game over. But if you forget where you left some snack, that's okay. So there's it's not quite the same in terms of the risk-reward balance, but we didn't evolve with newspapers and global media. So, our brain's sort of having a fear response to a bunch of dangers that are extremely unlikely to ever affect us.
I think it's fine if countries get together to form teams, but I think it's actually probably better if there are at least 2 or 3 country coalitions going to Mars in a friendly way. And competing to see who can make the most progress. And if you look at, say, the Olympics, it would be pretty boring if everyone just linked arms and crossed the finishing line at the same time. Friendly, but it would, not be...
More like the opening ceremonies, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I think friendly competition is a good thing.
Yeah.
Question your constraints. It does not matter if the person handing you those constraints won a Nobel Prize. Even Einstein was wrong some of the time. Right. So question your constraints. This is extremely important. And I think another thing that, you say, what are the mistakes that smart engineers make? I think that one of the biggest traps for smart engineers is optimizing a thing that shouldn't exist.
Yeah. So they'll just sit there and spin on that thing that's just like, why do we even have this in the first place?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So because when you go through college, you know, like studying physics and engineering, I studied physics. You have to answer the question that the professor gives you. You don't get to say this is the wrong question.
Right. Yeah.
But in reality, we have far more degrees. When you're in reality, you have all the degrees of freedom of reality. And so the first thing you should say is this question is wrong.
Yeah. And that's what you said last year.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of said like it took us a long time to frame the question even.
Yes.
Because we didn't necessarily know
It took
what it was.
ages to frame the question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Douglas Adams, best philosopher ever. Maybe, I think, best book in philosophy ever, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This book is so deep, people don't understand. But like in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the Earth is a giant computer.
Right.
And the Earth, it comes up with the answer 42.
Right. Yep.
And to the question, like, so what's the answer to life, the universe, and everything? Answer is 42. And like, they're like, what the hell? That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It's like, the hard part is the question. The answer is the easy part. You need a much more powerful computer to tell you what the question is.
Right.
And this is true. At the point at which you can properly frame the question, the answer is comparatively easy.
I think humans will solve environmental sustainability. I do not mean to suggest complacency or that we just take it easy. In fact, this is a self-fulfilling or unfulfilling prophecy. We must take immediate and dramatic action, and and continue the momentum towards environmental sustainability. And China is actually the world leader in this. In fact, I'm not sure how well it is known outside of China, just how much China is a world leader in environmental sustainability. It's extremely impressive. I mean, I think half of all the electric cars in the world were made in China last year, something like that. So, I don't mean to suggest complacency, but I do think humans can and will solve sustainability.
How much time do you have to go down into the engine room, roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, and fix stuff as an engineer? And how much time do you spend on the bridge steering and looking at the distant horizon?
Well, not a lot on that last point. There's a constant flurry of executional challenges, and so I try to triage my time according to what would be best for the companies, and still, have some time to see my kids, because I don't want to miss them growing up. So, it can vary from big issues to things that seem small but actually could have a really big impact. It's all the way from design aesthetics to the details of, say, the vehicle functionality, or in the case of the rocket, the avionics, propulsion system, and airframe. The rocket is kind of has more of a concentrated pucker factor, because you got these launches, and at least with a car you can do a recall or like do a software update. That's not going to happen with the rocket. So it's like passing grade is 100%, which induces anxiety.
The camera, and then somebody else with a camera.
It's just camera envy at this point. He's just trying to. He saw me with this, and he's like, "Listen."
I'll get my camera out.
Yeah, you take a video of me.
I can take a video of this. Of you guys taking
then
a video.
Then you get over, make sure this is going through there.
Okay.
Just shoot the screen the whole time.
Okay.
I don't want anything else.
All right, so this is okay. So I'm being videoed here, and then the video of the video, and this is the video of the video of the video.
Go back there.
Have us all just implement rigorously is the sort of 5-step process. First, make your requirements less dumb. Your requirements are definitely dumb. It does not matter who gave them to you. It's particularly dangerous if a smart person gave you the requirements, because you might not question them enough. Then try very hard to delete the part or process. This is actually very important. If you're not occasionally adding things back in, you are not deleting enough. Right. The bias tends to be very strongly towards let's add this part or process step in case we need it. But you can basically make in-case arguments for so many things, And for a rocket that is trying to achieve, try to be the first fully reusable rocket, there's never been a fully reusable rocket. People don't understand. Like, this is like the holy grail of rocketry,
100%.
okay? And so you really need, you have to run at tight margins, because if you don't run tight margins, you're going to get nothing to orbit.
Right.
So you got to delete the part or process step. Super important. Anyway, so step 1, make your requirements list dumb. Step 2, delete the part or process step. If you're not deleting a part or process step at least 10% of the time, basically if you're not adding things back in 10% of the time, you're clearly not deleting enough.
Right.
And then only the third step is simplify or optimize. The third step, not the first step. The reason it's the third step is because it's very common, it's possibly the most common error of a smart engineer is to optimize a thing that should not exist.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And you say, well, why would people do that? Well, everyone's been trained in high school and college that you got to answer the question, convergent logic.
Yep.
So you can't tell the professor your question is dumb, that you'll get a bad grade. You have to answer the question.
Yep.
So everyone's basically, without knowing it, they got like mental straitjacket on. That is, they'll work on optimizing the thing that should simply not exist. Finally, you get to step 4, which is accelerate cycle time. You're moving too slowly, go faster. But don't go faster until you have worked on the other 3 things first.
Gotcha.
Like if you're digging, your grave, don't dig it faster. Stop digging your grave.
Right.
But you can always make things go faster. And then the final step is automate. Now I have personally made the mistake of going backwards on all 5 steps, multiple times.
You have to imagine an outcome in order to head in that direction. And science fiction explores a lot of different ideas, so it can be helpful as a source of inspiration. Like books, TV shows, movies, they're all, I think, sources of inspiration. Most of the movies and TV shows about space are totally wrong, but they still have interesting ideas. Like the Star Trek communicator was an inspiration for the cell phone.
Yeah, with the flip, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
In
fact, the weird thing is like the phones we have in our pocket vastly exceed what was on Star Trek.
First of all, I think that's very exciting and inspiring, and there need to be things that are exciting and inspiring and make you look forward to waking up in the morning. Like, it's like, yay, the future is exciting. This is underappreciated, like tunnels. Sorry, it's like, all right. But there's got to be things that make you excited about life. It can't just be problem solving, one sort of miserable problem after another. It's got to be like, I'm fired up about the future, and here's why. And space is one of those things that does that for people all around the world. When Apollo 11, when they landed on the moon, that was something for all of humanity. It really was. And people would, if there's like one TV for 50 miles around, people would walk. They'd walk 50 miles just to go find that one TV to watch it happen. So sometimes people think, well, what about the poor nations of the world? They're like, you know what? It inspires them too. We need things like that. I think like if you're like trying to work on something, and like my experience is like it's really hard to if you're trying to figure out what others love but you don't love it, it's really hard to make that great. So when you work on something, if you fall in love with it, that's a good sign. And then don't worry about if others do. If you do, others will. An important thing in innovation or trying to create new things is to try really hard to do that, which may sound incredibly obvious, but that's what I find is most often what people don't do. They actually didn't try super hard to come up with something new. And it is helpful to have cross-pollination of industries. It's been quite difficult to run SpaceX and Tesla, but
there has been good ideas. Since I got both in my mind space, this good ideas going back and forth. For example, on the car, with respect to the car, the Model S is the only all-aluminum body and chassis car made in North America, and very few cars are all aluminum. In the aerospace industry, that's the default. So it seemed like obviously the right move in order to minimize the non-battery pack mass of the car. So in order to offset a fairly heavy battery pack, we had to make the rest of the car light, but still achieve a 5-star safety rating. I don't think it would have been possible to do that if we had used steel, which is the traditional method. And what's helped SpaceX has been that the car industry is really good at making complicated objects at a low cost. I mean, it's actually quite incredible that one can buy a decent car for $20,000. I mean, all the stuff that's in that car is, it's nutty how much stuff is in a car. At SpaceX, I hired a bunch of people from the auto industry to run manufacturing, which has worked out reasonably well.
Whatever requirement or constraint you have, it must come with a name, not a department. Because you can't ask the department, you have to ask a person. And that person who's putting forward the requirement or constraint must agree that they must take responsibility for that requirement. Otherwise, you can have a requirement that basically an intern 2 years ago randomly came up with off the cuff, and they're not even at the company anymore.
Right.
But it came from the, let's say, aero loads department. They're like, actually, no one in the aero loads department actually currently agrees with that. This is, by the way, happened several times.
So again, it can be literally.
I don't want to put on the aero loads department, but there's every department.
There's a lot of technical problems to solve. So I guess we sort of, start studying kind of engineering and physics and biosciences and that kind of thing would be the way to go. Going to be a lot of problems to solve to make a city work on Mars. We were thinking of, just as sort of a semi-joke, putting a job description on our website for urban planner in brackets Mars. There's going to be just a tremendous amount of problems to solve. There's just a lot of building and problem solving. So those are the right, skills to work on if someone's interested in going beyond Earth or space in general.
What's the actual biggest failure that you've gone through to get to where you are?
We blew up 3 rockets in the beginning. That was bad. I only had enough money. Originally, I basically took all the money I made from PayPal, put it into SpaceX, to creating SpaceX, Tesla, and SolarCity, and initially I figured I'd keep half of it, and then I'd spend the other half on these crazy adventures that would probably fail. And then, unfortunately, they needed all the money, so so I had to give them all the money. And then I didn't have a house or I had to borrow money for rent. That was pretty difficult. That was back in 2008. And then we managed to scrape enough spare parts together to do a 4th launch at SpaceX, and that worked. And if it had not worked, SpaceX would have died. Probably would have lacked the credibility to raise the remaining money for Tesla, and we wouldn't be here today. Or maybe it'd be not this ending.
Another mistake that tends to happen in production is too much in-process testing. When you're first setting up a production line, you don't know where where things are breaking. You don't know where things are breaking, so you'll test work in process at various steps, and because you want to isolate where's the mistake occurring. So a very common issue with production lines is to have is to not remove the in-process testing after you've diagnosed where the problems are. So basically, if you have a very high acceptance, if things are getting to end-of-line testing and are passing, then you don't need to do in-process testing. So, but what tends to happen is there'll be an initial development engineering team that will be basically debugging the production line. but then they will forget to take out the in-process testing steps. So then what happens is the in-process tester will often choke the cycle time, choke the line production time. It'll be like the limiter. It'll also have some number of false positives and false negatives. But I mean, it'll be like false positives, like then you're like rejecting good parts.
Right.
Really in volume production, if you have, if things are working well, you're really just taking a risk. Will this part be, will this subsystem be rejected at during the production process or at the end? And so you just really want to move things pretty much almost always to just test at the end of the line, and that's it. Maybe there's like 1 or 2 in-process steps that are hard to test at the end of line, but basically remove almost everything.
If a startup company did not create an electric vehicle and show that it's possible to have an electric car that looks good, goes fast, has long range, and that if you created such a thing that people would buy it, then it would be a very long time before the large incumbents did so. And so that was I felt it was important that we create Tesla for that reason. I think, so when you create a company, I mean, if you think, well, what is a company really? A company is a group of people gathered together to create a product or service. And that's really all a company is. And so you have to really believe in what you're creating and that it's, and know in your heart and mind that this is something that matters, that and that the world ought to have. And I think it's important to investors to show that you're all in. And I think, for example, with Tesla, the fact that I invested all the money I had, literally I had to borrow money from friends to pay the rent in 2008. The fact that I was all in, I think, was made a huge difference to investors, to convince them to invest in Tesla at the same time that say GM and Chrysler were going bankrupt. Yeah, I think you have to show that you really care. Like it's like that you've got skin in the game, and that you've given it everything that you've got, and then the other people at the company will follow suit, as will investors. I think that's really important.
Why do you think Tesla succeeded, whereas other car companies failed in their methods of electric cars? Like, why do you think Tesla is the leader in this idea?
Well, I mean, there haven't been that many car company startups. I mean, there was sort of Fisker and Coda, and then a few smaller ones, and then the rest has sort of been some fairly small-scale efforts by the big companies. I think if we say what was the difference between, say, Fisker and Tesla, that's maybe the most direct comparison. Tesla is a hardcore engineering company, and Fisker is kind of was based on styling. You know, it's like styling is good, important, but that's not the reason we don't have electric cars. So it's not, but for styling we would have electric cars. That's not the reason. So in the case of Fisker, they made a car that a lot of people think looked really good, but didn't work properly. So then people don't want to buy the car. That's like a pretty reasonable thing, I think. I mean, if you think of like what's the point of a company existing? The point is that it's a group of people that have gathered together to create a product. If the product is good, the company should exist, and if it is not good, the company should not exist. That seems like fundamental to the nature of companies. So clearly then one should focus on making the absolute best product you can, otherwise you reduce the probability of success. But a lot of companies focus on things that aren't really to do with the product, as though a company has
any basis for existing apart from doing useful things. That's kind of strange.
What drives you? What is it that when you wake up in the morning, do you see a problem and you want to solve it?
I think the thing that drives me is that I want to be able to think about the future and feel good about that. That we're doing what we can to have the future be as good as possible, to be inspired by what is likely to happen, and to look forward to the next day. So that's what really drives me is trying to figure out how to make sure that things are great and going to be so, and that's the underlying principle behind Tesla and SpaceX. Is that I think it's pretty important that we accelerate the transition to sustainable generation and consumption of energy. It's inevitable, but it matters if it happens sooner or later. And then SpaceX is about helping make life multiplanetary and doing what we can to continue the dream of Apollo and ultimately make a contribution to life becoming multiplanetary.
As you recall, the recession was particularly difficult for car companies. And right as in the summer of 2008, we had to raise a big funding round. But because of the collapse in the financial system, that funding round didn't happen. And we had to piece together the money to keep the company going from myself and existing investors. And we were able to just complete a financing round that was just barely enough to keep the company going. And we closed it on the last hour of the last day that it was possible to do so. It was Christmas Eve, 2008, 6 p.m. And after that, the investors would have they were going on vacation, wouldn't have been possible to bring them back to the table, and we would have run out of money a few days after Christmas. So that was also a close call. So while things are going really well these days, I think it's always important to remember that when you're creating a company, there are very dark times, and it's about getting through those dark times. That's the difference between success and failure. After that third trip, I'd learned a lot more about rockets at that point, and I held a series of meetings, just sort of brainstorming sessions with people from the space industry to try to understand if I was missing something fundamental about the ability to improve rocketry. And this is where I think it's helpful to use the approach, the analytical approach in physics, which is to try to boil things down to first principles and reason from there, as opposed to reasoning by analogy. And the way this applied to rocketry was to say, okay, well, what are the materials that go into a rocket? How much does each material constituent weigh? What's the cost of that raw material? And that's going to set some floor as to the cost of the rocket. And that actually turns out to be a relatively small number. Certainly well under 5% of the cost of a rocket, and in some cases closer to 1 or 2%. And so I call it sort of maybe the magic wand number. So if you had a pile of the raw material, piles of raw materials on the floor, and you could just wave a magic wand and rearrange them, then that would be the best case scenario for a rocket. And so I was able to see, okay, well, there's clearly a great deal of room for improvement, even if you consider rockets to be expendable. And so I think that's what I mean by sort of thinking about things from a first principle standpoint. If on the other hand, I sort of analyzed it by analogy and said, okay, well, analogy would be, well, what are all other rocket companies, what do their rockets cost? What historically have other rockets cost? And that would be sort of an analogy thing, but it really doesn't illustrate what the true potential is.
And so I think it's sort of a first principles approach is a good way to understand what new things are possible. So this is a good framework.
The proposed Mars expedition, how exactly do you plan on making it cost efficient?
Sure. Well, now that is indeed a tricky problem. I mean, I feel reasonably possible that that success is at least one of the possible outcomes. This is pretty important when you're trying to do something. It's like, well, can that be one of the outcomes? I wasn't actually confident about that until a few years ago. Now, I'm not saying we will get there, but I'm confident that it is at least possible. And the key to that is having a fully reusable Mars transportation system, so that all you are replacing between flights, maybe apart from minor maintenance, is the propellant. I mean, this like reusability is so fundamental to having a major change in space flight. It would be difficult to overstate its importance. But I mean, I think with analogy to other modes of transport, you can imagine that if airplanes could only be used once, very few people would fly, because it would be super crazy expensive. I guess like a 747 costs $250 million. You'd need 2 of them just for a round trip. But people are not paying $500 million to fly back and forth to London. And that's because you can use the 747 like 20,000 times. And for a rocket, a Falcon 9 rocket costs about $60 million to build. And so if it can be used once, obviously that's a $60 million capital cost. But if it can be used 1,000 times, then it's only a $60,000 capital cost. I mean, that is, it is the fundamental difference. So you have to have fully reusable, then you have to make sure that the propellant used is as low cost as possible. So our next generation rockets will be using methane as a fuel, which methane is the lowest cost source fuel on the planet, by a good margin. So, and so I think if your propellant costs are low and the system is fully reusable, then I think it should be possible to move to Mars for less than $500,000, which I think is an important threshold, because if people can sell all this stuff on Earth and move to Mars, well, and there's enough people who can do that, combined with those who actually want to do that, that's the fundamental thing needed to have a growing colony on Mars. I mean, kind of like the way that the U.S. was, like the early English colonies in America. When it became affordable for people to sell all their stuff in England and move to America, it grew really fast. In the absence of that, it would just require humongous amounts of government support, and I think probably wouldn't result in a self-sustaining civilization. So the economics of it are extremely fundamental.
It sure is important to get the rules right. It's sort of, in terms of legislative and executive actions, it's sort of like, think of, say, like professional sports or something. If you don't have the rules right, if there isn't, if the game isn't set up properly, it's not going to be a good game. So it's real important to get the rules right. Now, I think it's worth noting that I think still in the United States the rules are still better than anywhere else. It's very easy to put something in place which is an inhibitor to innovation without realizing it. So in terms of the regulatory environment, it's always important to bear in mind that regulations are immortal, and they never die unless somebody actually goes and kills them, and then they get a lot of momentum. So a lot of times regulations can be put in place for all the right reasons, but then nobody goes back and gets rid of them afterwards when they no longer make sense. And there used to be a rule in the early days when people were concerned about automobiles, because that was a pretty scary thing, to see a carriage just going wrong by itself. Mm-hmm. You never know what those things might do. So there were like rules where you had to, in a lot of states, where you had to carry a lantern in front of the automobile. And it had to be like 100 paces ahead of the automobile. There had to be someone with a lantern on a pole. I'm like, okay. But you should really get rid of that regulation. And they did, because it would really be awkward. So just regulations, even if done correctly and being right at the time, it's always important to go back and scrub those, periodically to make sure they're still sensible and they're still serving the greater good.
When you hire people, or really what you're trying to, when you hire people, that just means you're convincing people to join you in the endeavor. You should hire people that are also passionate about what you're doing. So it's not just that they're not just there for the salary. They really need to care about what they're doing, and then they will stay during the dark times.
Here's another question from a Tesla owner. Why is there no coat hook in the back?
Yeah.
He or she says, you can design a rocket, but you forgot the coat hooks?
Well, I didn't actually forget it. I intentionally didn't like it, so I didn't put it there. The aesthetics of it really bothered me, but and I know, obviously some people disagree with that decision. But I think we might have a retroactive fix for that if somebody has the panoramic roof, which is to basically have a hook on the bow section in the middle of the roof. And then your coat could hang down in the second row passenger footwell, which is actually slightly better than having a coat hook that's stuck on the side of the car. So I think we'll probably do that. Yeah.
How do we figure out how to take you to Mars and create a self-sustaining city, a city that is not merely an outpost, but could become a planet in its own right, and for us, thus we could become a truly multi-planet species. Sometimes people wonder, well, what about other places in the solar system? Why Mars? Just to sort of put things into perspective, this is an actual scale of what the solar system looks like. So we're currently in the third little rock from the left. That's Earth. Yeah, exactly. And our goal is to go to the fourth rock on the left. That's Mars. But you can get a sense for the real scale of the solar system, how big the Sun is, and Jupiter, Neptune, Saturn, Uranus, and then the little guys on the right are Pluto and friends. This sort of helps see it not quite to scale, but it gives you a better sense for where things are. So our options for becoming a multi-planet species within our solar system are limited. We have, in terms of nearby options, we've got Venus, but Venus is a high pressure, super high pressure hot acid bath. So that would be a tricky one. Venus is not at all like the goddess. This is not in no way similar to the actual goddess. So it's really difficult to make things work on Venus. Mercury is also way too close to the sun. We could go potentially on one of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn, but those are quite far out, much further from the sun, a lot harder to get to. It really leaves us with one option if we want to become a multi-planet civilization, and that's Mars. We could conceivably go to our moon, and I certainly have nothing against going to the moon, but I think it's challenging to create become multiplanetary on the moon because it's much smaller than a planet. It doesn't have any atmosphere. It's not as resource rich as Mars. It's got a 28-day day, whereas the Mars day is 24.5 hours. And in general, Mars is far better suited to ultimately scale up to be a self-sustaining civilization. The first 3 flights of the Falcon 1 failed, or rather, they certainly didn't get to orbit. The second and third flights arguably got to space, but they did not reach full orbital velocity. And then fortunately, the fourth flight worked. And if it hadn't, SpaceX wouldn't be around, because I'd basically run out of money. So that was a bit of a nail biter. And thank goodness. And in fact, this all happened in 2008. So yeah, there was really no ability to raise outside money in a meaningful way in 2008 because of the financial crisis. So you can imagine trying to go to raise money, saying, well, yes, we just had 4 failures and the world is in financial ruin, but would you like to give us some money? That would be a definite no. So fortunately, that succeeded, and we were able to go from Falcon 1 to begin designing the Falcon 9, which is an order of magnitude larger vehicle, and in fact has more than 20 times the payload. So it's got a payload to orbit of over 10 tons, and that actually has gone a lot better because we had the experience of Falcon 1 to go by, and part of the reason we started with Falcon 1 was because I thought we would make a lot of mistakes, and if we're going to make a lot of mistakes, then it's best to make those mistakes at a small scale rather than at a large scale. And that seems to have worked because going to Falcon 9, we've had 4 flights of Falcon 9, and they've all 4 of them have been successful. So I think that principle seems to have worked reasonably well. Touch wood and all that. Flight 5's coming up soon.
You mostly created new companies. What is your recipe for that?
What is my recipe?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's quite difficult to create a new company and have it be successful. And generally, I do not recommend creating new companies unless you feel very compelled to do so. Starting a new company and making it successful, a friend of mine has a good thing for that, which is it's like eating glass and staring into the abyss. So that sounds like something you want to do, then start a company. So it's quite difficult. But I mean, the basics of starting a company are, you have to have an idea that is compelling, or you think that could be a product that could be very valuable to the world. And then you've got to find a lot of talented people and convince them to do this new thing, because talented people are already doing something. So you have to convince them to do the new thing. And that can be it's very hard to do that. And then you have to build the company up. And a company goes through a life cycle, like just a sort of like a human or like any animal. It starts off very simple, like 1 cell, then you get a few more cells, and then you get some organ differentiation, you start growing arms and legs, and they become like a baby, and then a toddler, a child and teenager, adult. The life cycle of a company is very much like that of a creature, and you have to reinvent the company at every stage. So this is why some companies get to be a large size and some do not. It's because you actually have to reconfigure the country at the various stages of its life cycle.
How do you balance your capacity for risk, your risk tolerance, against your desire to continue to innovate?
I think that I was certainly facing the loss of all assets. I mean, technically I would have been negative because I would have been owing people money.
But I figured I could always make enough to, or at least borrow enough to pay the rent and buy food and that kind of thing. So I didn't think we would starve or lack for shelter. Although it would have been sad to to have lost all the assets gained from prior companies. But really, the toughest decision was not whether to invest the money into Tesla. It was really that I had Tesla and SpaceX, and the tough decision was if I split the money between the two companies, then it's possible that both may still have died. And so I had to decide, would I dedicate funds to just one company and let the other one die for sure, or split the funds between the two companies? And that was the really difficult decision. I think in the future, people will look back and say, wow, I can't believe we had to drive these cars ourselves. It'll like self-driving cars will just be just a normal, like self-driving elevators. Elevators used to have elevator operators, and there's someone there with a big relay switch operating the elevator, and then every now and then they'd get tired or make a mistake and shear somebody in half. So now we made the elevators automatic, and you just go and you press the button, and you can be in a 100-story skyscraper and don't really worry about it. Just go in and press the button, and the elevator takes you where you want to go. But it used to be that all elevators were operated manually. It'll be the same thing like for cars. All cars will be automatic. And then and electric, obviously. So there will still be some gasoline cars and some manual cars, just like there are still some horses. If we just step away from our sort of internecine squabbles and say, let's look at the big picture here. What set of actions can we take that maximize the probability that the future is going to be good for civilization and for consciousness? And I think we should regard consciousness on Earth as delicate, not just fragile. What sort of actions can we do to ensure that it continues and that the scope and scale of consciousness expands? And I'm in favor of expansion because, if we want to understand what the universe is about and what's the meaning of life, and we need to get out there and find out. And the more we expand the scope and scale of consciousness, the better we will be able to understand what questions to ask about the answer that is the universe.
As a young man who's out there searching for himself, and as many in my generation are, we have jobs, not really careers, and we're searching, we continuously face unemployment. How do we convert the ideology of space, future, and energy, and how do we personalize it so that we ourselves can convert this energy into something meaningful? How do we get involved? Okay, well, I think you can either work at a company in those arenas or say, okay, what's some important piece of the puzzle in rockets or cars or something, and then put together a group of people and figure out how to make that piece of the puzzle super good. And that's I think that's the way to do it.
You had a recent space. You sent up a bunch of civilians into space. You did not send yourself up.
No, I've not set myself up. I suppose I will at some point. But my goal is not to set myself up. My goal is to open up space for humanity and ultimately set us on a path to becoming a spacefaring civilization and a multi-planet species.
We also developed the Dragon spacecraft because somewhat opportunistically, NASA announced that they were going to retire the space shuttle, and they didn't have the budget to develop a cargo transport capability to the space station via the normal large government way, and so they put it out to bid to commercial industry for the first time in NASA history. It was quite a big step, and we were lucky enough to win one of those contracts, and then the other company wasn't able to execute, and so they got cut, and so we ended up being the primary means of
transporting cargo to and from the space station.
What lessons have you learned from Silicon Valley that could apply here in small town America?
Well, I mean, the most important thing is people. So you need to gather together a group of engineers, essentially, to create technology. And that's what engineers do. They create technology. But you have to have a critical mass of such people that's equal to the task that you attempt to complete. So that's the most important thing, a critical mass of people.
The technology is expensive at first. You can't just, when you're trying to develop brand new technology, it doesn't instantly become cheap and affordable. I mean, think of like cell phones, and the early cell phones were really expensive and sucked, frankly. Like, you think of like Wall Street One, where, he's walking down the beach with the shoebox-sized cell phone on it, talking to this, so just like really expensive, and the tech wasn't that great. But if some number of people didn't pay for the expensive cell phones, there would not be the inexpensive cell phones that everyone can afford.
So we should thank billionaires for going into space.
I mean, it doesn't have to be top of your thank you list, but I mean, it's not, I'm just saying that when there's new technology, it is necessarily expensive until you can refine the design and you can scale things up, and then you can make it more affordable. There's a common misconception that there's some new technology, especially if it's a physical object, that you can just suddenly make it cheap and available, but you have to have many design iterations, and you got to scale up the production and get economies of scale. Like, we had this argument against Tesla for a long time, because people would say, like, well, why are you building this Tesla Roadster back in the day? It's basically, it's an expensive toy sports car for rich people. And we're like, yes, it is, but there's no way we could build an affordable electric car as our first car. We just didn't have the capital, we didn't have the experience, and we needed to go through several technology iterations in order to get to something like the Model 3.
Right.
I actually wrote a blog about this because I knew people would be like, why are you making sports cars for rich people, as though we thought there was somehow a shortage of sports cars for rich people. We're obviously not. But you just gotta figure out the technology. You gotta go through multiple design. Like, how do you make something mass market and affordable? Many design iterations, many different versions of the technology, a lot of hard work, and then you've got to scale up the production rate so you get economies of scale. And those two things are what make any given technology available to the public. And basically every technology that we take for granted today has gone through that evolution.
Tesla has come close to bankruptcy, I don't know, maybe half a dozen times over its life. And actually probably the most serious one was 2008 and 2009, because Tesla was just a very small company making in low volume a sports car that was kind of expensive, and it was basically the only electric car being built at the time. So it was very difficult to get customers and very difficult to get investors. And although I had money from PayPal, I had actually run out of the money from PayPal. So I personally had no money left. In fact, I had to borrow money from friends to pay the rent. I didn't even have a house. So it was pretty intense. And like in that case, we actually raised the money to keep the company going on Christmas Eve of 2008. And that was the last hour of the last day that it was possible to raise money. And if that call had not gone well, then we would have gone bankrupt. That was pretty intense. And then the next most intense time was, the 2018, 2019, when we were struggling to get the Model 3 to volume production. And so we were really in a very tough situation. Because the thing that's, I think a lot of people don't fully appreciate is that while it's actually relatively easy to come up with prototypes and show cars,
it is very difficult to achieve volume manufacturing. The notable thing I think about Tesla is not so much that Tesla made electric cars, because others have made electric cars, but rather that Tesla was able to achieve volume manufacturing, I think, as the first US company to achieve volume manufacturing in 100 years, after Chrysler in the 20s. So the difficulty of this cannot be overstated. Production is staggeringly hard, and I have a great deal of respect for companies and people that are able to do volume production and make good products and actually be prosperous. It's very difficult. So it's just one thing after another. Yeah, and I'd say probably the longest extended period of pain that I've had is from 2017 to 2019. Just about almost 3 years there. There was a bunch of very misleading stuff that was published by ProPublica. And really that was some sort of trickery, and really they did themselves no good service by doing that. So first of all, with respect to the government contracts that SpaceX wins, our aspiration is to do the most for the least. And if you look at all the contracts we've won them because we're the best price. We have a better service at a lower price. They weren't just handed to us.
I don't think they were. And that's what I'm saying. In fact, you called me and said, we finally got in after years of sort of this backslapping. I think it's a great thing. That is a great thing.
Absolutely. I mean, for the lunar lander, just taking that as one example, our bid was half the price of the Blue Origin Lockheed bid. Half. So for a vehicle that does basically 10 times more or 8 times more perhaps, our price was half.
Okay.
And NASA has a mandate to get back to the moon, so we saved taxpayers like $3 billion relative to that contract. So I think that's a good thing.
There's sometimes a debate about going to Mars one way and whether that makes things easier. And I think for the initial flights perhaps, but for long term, to get the cost down, you need the spacecraft back. Whether the people come back is irrelevant. But you must have the ship back because those things are expensive. So anyone who wants to return can just jump on. So that's. But until a few years ago, I wasn't sure that success was one of the possible outcomes, and now I'm quite sure that success is possible. Of course, there's a long way between possible and making it real, but I believe it is possible.
The source of my inspiration, I'd say, is somewhat philosophical. So I think the thing we should be aiming for is increasing the scope and scale of human civilization, so as to best ask the right questions for the answer, which is reality, or the universe. And so if you accept that premise, then we should work to ensure the long-term survival and prosperity of humanity, of consciousness, and we should seek to extend that consciousness beyond Earth to other planets, eventually other star systems. That is the nature of my philosophy.
He did one great tweet about time, saying time is the currency, which I thought was beautiful.
Time is the ultimate currency, yes. No matter what resources you have, you can't wind back the clock.
It's true.
Yeah.
Going into the future, our goal with Tesla is to keep refining the technology, increasing the scale of production, and make a mass market electric car that almost anyone can afford. That's step 3 on the strategy. So step 1 was a high price, low volume. Step 2, mid price, mid volume. Step 3, low price, high volume. So we're sort of at step 2, and now we want to progress to step 3 as soon as possible.
There's another important principle, which is that you really want everyone to be chief engineer. So that everyone is chief engineer means that people need to understand the system at a high level, to know what they when they are making a bad optimization. It's like when they are say, like this, we've done this many times where we've put immense effort into reducing the engine mass, but hardly any effort into reducing propellant residuals, or order of magnitude less effort into reducing propellant residuals, and then you land with a literal ton of unused fuel.
What is the one thing that has surprised you about your life?
Oh, one thing, wow. Well, I'm surprised by the whole thing, honestly. I certainly didn't expect for any of these things to happen, honestly. Yeah. I just knew, I knew I wanted to be involved in technology. In fact, the only reason I started a company back in '95, an internet company, was because I couldn't get it. There were only a few internet companies, and I couldn't get a job at any of them. So I tried to get a job at Netscape, and sent my resume in and tried hanging out in the lobby, but I was too shy to talk to anyone. And then I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll have to start a company because I can't get a job anywhere. Solar energy is often underestimated, but the Earth would be just a cold, dark ice ball at 3 degrees above absolute zero if it was not for the sun. And the sun also powers almost the entire ecosystem. You know, from the sun powers the plants and the plankton, and then from there the whole ecosystem above plants and plankton. So you can think of really Earth as being already almost entirely solar powered, and but then there's like a little bit of extra power that's needed to power human civilization, which is small compared to the total solar incidence on Earth. You know, the solar energy on Earth is approximately a gigawatt per square kilometer. And if you wanted to, say, power all of Europe with solar, you would only need a fairly small piece of land, but in reality, it would be distributed over many pieces of land, so you don't have to have too many long power lines. But basically, like as a rough guide, about 200 kilometers by 200 kilometers of solar would power all of Europe. Maybe even a little bit less, but comfortably 200 kilometers by 200 kilometers of solar would power all of Europe. So, this could be a combination of land within Europe, or perhaps just across the Mediterranean, where there's a lot of sun. But basically, there's so much solar that you could very, very easily, with a very small patch of land, relatively speaking, power all of Europe, all of the world, in fact. So this is important to appreciate, that only a very small portion of the world would need to have solar panels to power all of civilization, and then an even smaller piece of land would be required for the batteries required to store that solar energy overnight, so that you can have energy at night and during the day.
What's going on with you and Twitter? I am a Twitter addict. I say the wrong things all the time. What is it? Someone explained it to me, who's very close to you, saying it's your release valve. This is where you feel better.
Yeah, I think I said some people use their hair to express themselves. I use Twitter.
Do you regret any of it or not? You are kind of prominent.
Yeah, I mean, sure.
Walk us through when you decide to do a tweet. You go, no.
Well,
yes.
I think about it for hours.
Do you?
And I consult with my strategy team.
You just literally go, yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe I'm wasted on that. Gone. Let me shoot myself in the foot. Bam. Now let me shoot myself in the foot. Bam.
Yeah.
That describes some of my tweets.
Yeah.
I don't really like risk for risk's sake or anything. And I do think that a lot of things are very risky with a low chance of success. But if you want to try to come up with an innovative breakthrough, that's going to be how it is. Anything which is significantly innovative, is going to come with a significant risk of failure. But if you've got to take big chances in order for the potential for a big positive outcome. If the outcome is exciting enough, then taking a big risk is worthwhile.
Yeah.
It's really how I approach it. But then once executing down a path, I actually do my absolute best to reduce risk, or to improve another way of saying it, to improve the probability of success, because when you try to do something that is very, very risky, that you have to spend a lot of effort trying to reduce that risk as you embark down that path. I mean, when I started SpaceX, I thought the odds of success were very low. I thought we'd most likely fail, but I thought, well, we should give it a try nonetheless. You want to make something beautiful. I mean, you want to trigger whatever fundamental aesthetic algorithms are like in your brain. You have, I think, some intrinsic elements that represent beauty, and that trigger the emotion of appreciation of beauty in your mind. And I think that these are actually relatively consistent among people. I mean, not completely. Some people not everyone likes the same thing, but there's a lot of commonality. But I think it is important to combine aesthetic design with functionality. Like the thing that's, like if you say what was really hard about, say, the Model S or the Model X, was to combine aesthetics and utility. So to balance the two. You can make a car look very good by giving it sort of certain proportions, like making it sort of low and slim, but if you do that, the utility is significantly affected. I wanted to spur ideas and thinking about the long-term need to capture carbon, I think this is one of those things that's going to take a while to figure out what the right solution is. And especially to figure out what the best economics are for CO2 removal, and all think through all the consequences. You don't want the cure to be worse than the disease.
Yeah.
Sometimes people say, "Well, just plant a bunch of trees." I'm like, that's not so easy. Like
a trillion trees.
Sure, exactly. And then you got to okay, well, you need to get fertilizer. You're going to water them. Where's the water going to come from? What habitat are you potentially destroying where the trees used to be? It's not just a no-brainer of just go plant a bunch of trees.
But it's not to say that's not a good viable option.
We should plant some trees. Yeah. I'm in favor of planting trees. It's just not a question of there are vast sections of like the Sahara Desert or some large barren areas, very dry areas in the U.S. Where you could in theory plant a lot of trees, but you're going to need a lot of water. Yeah. And you're going to need you're going to have to cultivate them. It's not like they don't just throw some seeds on the ground.
We'll drop them from orbit.
Yeah, and I mean, so I think it'd be good to sort of kind of frame the debate and understand, okay, what things are really going to move the needle? How much are they going to move the needle? If we're talking about getting tens or hundreds of billions of tons of carbon, in what form will that carbon be? Yeah. Will it be stable over time? And like I said, what is it going to cost humanity to do? However it's paid for, what is it going to cost? What's the thing that's going to be most affordable?
Because you made it this far in the video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you're different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So it's a special celebration if you put a hashtag Believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video because you are awesome. For 50 more rules from Jeff Bezos, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
I would definitely advise a small startup company to be as narrow and as focused as is possible to be. If you look at the original Amazon business plan, there was no hint of anything other than books in it.